hear the metal grinding against metal, echoing through the empty corridors of Fort Blackwater at exactly 3:17 a.m. The sound cuts through the silence like a blade, followed by the unmistakable clank of cannon wheels rolling across stone. But that's impossible. The fort has been empty for 6 months, and you're the only security guard on duty tonight. Night security at Fort Blackwater Historic Site paid better than anything else you could find, and the work was supposed to be simple. Walk the perimeter twice per shift. Check that the gates remain locked and make sure no vandals or urban explorers tried to break into the restored Civil War fortification. And climb the ramparts to admire the antique cannons. But something changes when the sun goes down and the last tourist bus disappears down the winding coastal road. The shadows grow deeper, the silence becomes oppressive, and you start to understand why this place has such trouble keeping security guards. Each morning, you arrive to discover that several of the artillery pieces have been moved during the night, not dramatically, just a few degrees of elevation or bearing adjustment, as if someone had been fine-tuning their aim. The cannons are massive iron monsters that would require heavy machinery to move, yet somehow they shift position with the silence of shadows. What the hiring manager didn't mention was why the position had been vacant for 6 months, or why the previous 3 guards had all quit without giving notice. You can distinguish individual speakers now, a sergeant barking orders, privates acknowledging instructions, the steady rhythm of a gun crew loading and preparing their weapon. But the sounds come from empty air, spoken by men who cast no shadows and leave no footprints in the dust that coats the stone floor. The smell of gunpowder drifting through corridors where no firearms have been fired in decades. The sound is absolutely deafening in the enclosed space, a thunderclap that leaves your ears ringing and your vision blurred. The cannon sits silent and cold, showing no signs of recent firing. Morrison wrote to his sister about strange orders the garrison had received, instructions to prepare for an enemy attack that made no tactical sense. The official report lists explosion damage and casualties, but provides no details about what caused the blast or why so many men died in what should have been a survivable accident. More disturbing are the reports filed by the cleanup crews who arrived afterward. Multiple witnesses describe finding the artillery positions arranged in a perfect circle, their cannons all aimed inward, toward the center of the fort's parade ground. "We've been told to load the guns with something other than shot," he wrote. "The colonel won't say what, but the ammunition came in crates marked with symbols I don't recognize. The men are spooked, and rightfully so. Something's not natural about this place, but you need the money, and something deeper keeps you coming back, a morbid curiosity about what you've stumbled into, and a growing suspicion that the fort's official history is missing some crucial details. What you discover is a pattern of strangeness that goes back to the fort's construction. Workers reported tools moving on their own and voices calling from empty rooms. The first garrison commander requested transfer after only 3 months, citing atmospheric disturbances that interfered with normal operations. No powder residue stains its barrel, no heat radiates from its iron mass, but the smell of gunpowder lingers in the air like a ghost, and you know with absolute certainty that what you witnessed was impossible by every law of physics and reason. Smoke fills the gun emplacement, not the white vapor of modern propellants, but the thick, choking cloud of black powder combustion. The acrid smell burns your nostrils and makes your eyes water, while the afterimage of muzzle flash dances behind your eyelids. The cannon completes its movement and stops with a soft click of metal against metal. Then you hear the voices men calling out in the terminology of 19th century artillery crews. Elevation 3 degrees. Load solid shot. Prime and ready. But when you sweep your flashlight across the gun emplacement, you see nothing but empty space and antique metal. Cold spots that have nothing to do with the ocean breeze. Pockets of air so frigid that your breath mists even on warm summer nights. You tell yourself it's just an old building settling. Atmospheric pressure changes. Perfectly rational explanations for phenomena that make your skin crawl. Hey guys, tonight we're descending into one of the most haunted military installations on the eastern seaboard, where the dead refuse to acknowledge that their war ended over a century ago. This is the story of a night security guard who discovered that some soldiers never got the order to stand down. Your flashlight beam sweeps across the gun emplacement, illuminating the usual collection of restored Civil War artillery. But as you turn to leave, movement catches your eye. One of the cannons is slowly, impossibly, rotating on its carriage. The massive iron barrel swings through a precise arc, its mouth tracking some invisible target in the darkness beyond the fort walls. And their eternal vigil comes with a price that no living person should ever have to pay. You wouldn't survive what happened in those gun emplacements. The air still tastes of black powder and blood. And the artillery crews manning those positions have been loading their cannons with something far worse than iron shot. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and the time you're listening in the comments. I always love seeing where these stories find their way. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The job seemed perfect when you applied 3 weeks ago. Fort Blackwater squats on a rocky promontory overlooking the harbour like a stone cancer, its brick walls weathered but still imposing after 160 years. The fortress was built in 1863 to protect the harbour from Confederate naval attacks that never came, and it saw action only once during a mysterious incident in 1865 that left half the garrison dead and the other half transferred immediately to other posts. The official records claim a powder magazine explosion caused the casualties. Local historians whisper about something far more sinister. Your first 2 weeks pass without incident. The fort is actually peaceful during daylight hours. When tour groups wander through the restored barracks, it begins with small things. Doors that you're certain you lock standing open when you return from your rounds. But rationality becomes harder to maintain when you start finding the cannon positions rearranged. The first time you actually see them, you're making your 3 a.m. rounds through the main battery. You freeze, every instinct screaming at you to run, but fascination keeps you rooted in place. The voices continue, growing clearer with each command. Your hands shake as you key the radio to call your supervisor, but before you can speak, the artillery fires. When the smoke clears and your hearing returns, you're alone again. You should quit. Every rational cell in your brain screams at you to walk away from this job and never return. Research becomes your obsession during daylight hours. You spend your free time in the local library, poring over newspaper archives and military records from the 1860s, but it's a letter from Private Samuel Morrison, dated March 15, 1865, that provides the first real clue about what happened at Fort Blackwater. Morrison's letter is the last documented communication from Fort Blackwater before the incident that killed half the garrison. You're still pondering the implications of this discovery when you hear the first cannon fire. The sound is unmistakable now, close enough that the lighthouse windows rattle in their frames. You rush outside, flashlight in hand, but what you see defies every rational explanation your mind tries to provide. The cannons are firing in sequence, their barrels belching out of flame and smoke into the night air. But there are no crews visible, no figures manning the guns. The artillery pieces are operating themselves, their massive iron mouths speaking in the ancient language of black powder and thunder. The entry describes encountering a battery of rebel artillery firing from Beacon Point, despite the fact that Confederate forces never operated this far north. The cannons aren't just firing randomly into the darkness they're hunting, they're harvesting the crews. Every soul that gets pulled down in these waters joins the gun crews. The lighthouse isn't just a navigation aid, it's bait. Somewhere out there, ships are heading this way, pleasure craft, fishing boats, cargo vessels. It doesn't matter. The cannons aren't particular about their targets. They just need souls to feed the eternal battery, fresh crew members to serve the guns that guard this haunted stretch of coastline. Join the conspiracy that's been claiming lives for 150 years. The isolation will end, then you'll have company, endless company, as the ghostly artillery crews welcome their newest member. You'll never be alone again. The artillery crews need the light to draw their targets within range, and they've been waiting patiently for over a century for someone foolish enough or desperate enough to provide it. The mechanism is ready, waiting for your command. Below, you can see the cannons beginning to move, their barrels adjusting elevation and bearing as Spectral gun crews prepare for another night's hunting. A boat is coming, drawn by navigation charts that still mark beacon point light as an active aid to navigation. The gun crews stand at their posts, waiting for your signal. All you have to do is flip the switch, and the eternal watch will continue. The waves will claim another vessel, and the silence will be broken by the companionship of the damned. Its crew has no idea what awaits them in these waters, no knowledge of the artillery battery that has been hunting in the darkness since before their grandparents were born. They've been waiting so long for fresh prey, and the night is perfect for hunting. Dark enough to hide the muzzle flashes, quiet enough for the screams to carry clearly across the water, cold enough that the bodies will sink quickly, leaving no evidence for the morning search parties to discover. The artillery captain stands beside the nearest cannon, still wearing his Civil War uniform, still saluting the lighthouse with the patience of the eternally damned. Your great-uncle managed to resist the temptation for nearly 4 decades. His uncle before him held out for even longer, but eventually the isolation and the constant pressure broke them all down. Eventually, every lighthouse keeper at Beacon Point makes the same choice. That's why there are never any bodies found, never any survivors. The dead don't drown, they just change assignments. Every ship that's disappeared along this coast was lured here by the lighthouse beacon, drawn close enough to shore to fall within range of the artillery. But these aren't physical cannonballs tearing through hulls and rigging. Whatever ammunition these ghostly guns are firing operates on a different level entirely, targeting something more fundamental than wood and canvas and steel. The captain ordered return fire, but when morning came, his shore party found no evidence of enemy positions, only the lighthouse and its elderly keeper, who claimed to have seen and heard nothing unusual during the night. As you watch in fascination and growing terror, the pattern becomes clear. The cannons aren't firing randomly, they're delivering a coordinated barrage at specific coordinates offshore. You approach the nearest cannon with trembling hands, your flashlight beam revealing details that shouldn't be possible. The metal inks hot enough to burn bare skin, fresh powder residue coats the barrel's interior, and carved into the iron carriage, so faint you almost miss it, are tally marks, hundreds of them, scored into the metal as if someone has been keeping count of something for a very, very long time. The same coordinates, you realize with a chill, that has nothing to do with the night air, where Dr. Morrison's research indicated ships had been disappearing for 2 centuries. The firing stops as suddenly as it began, leaving only the smell of gunpowder and the ringing in your ears. Sleep becomes impossible after that night. Every sound makes you jump. Every shadow seems to conceal watching figures. You catch yourself staring out the lighthouse windows at all hours, scanning the horizon for ships that might be sailing toward whatever trap these cannons represent. What you discover paints a picture that's both impossible and terrifyingly consistent. The cannons at Beacon Point have been firing for over 150 years, always during the new moon, always at the same offshore coordinates. Local newspapers from the 1800s occasionally mentioned strange thunder coming from the lighthouse area, but such reports always disappear from subsequent editions, as if someone with influence preferred these incidents to remain unrecorded. The isolation that once seemed peaceful now feels oppressive, dangerous. You're not just alone here or numbered by the dead. Research becomes your obsession. You drive to the nearest town library, spending hours poring over historical records and newspaper archives. The most disturbing discovery comes from a ship's log dated 1863, written by the captain of a Union Navy vessel that was patrolling these waters during the Civil War. 3 weeks into your residence at Beacon Point, you finally understand what your great-uncle discovered in his final years. The realization hits you as you're reading the final entry in your great-uncle's journal, a passage you somehow missed during your first examination. They were not trying to sink the ships. You understand now why the beacon must never shine after midnight. Tonight is the new moon. The offshore waters are empty now. Have been 4 hours, but you know that will change as the darkness deepens. You're standing in the lighthouse lamp room now, your hand resting on the beacon controls. All you have to do is throw the switch, light the beacon. Guide the ships within range of the guns. The sound of approaching engines drifts across the water, growing stronger with each passing moment. Your hand tightens on the beacon control. The cannons are loaded and ready. The choice is yours. But choose quickly, the boat is getting closer, and the cannons are growing impatient. You're safe now, but just in case ... don't look behind you. You hear it again, that deep, resonating boom echoing across the water, rolling through the fog like thunder from a storm that never breaks. But there are no storms tonight. This is the story of a lighthouse keeper who discovered that some inheritances come with prices no sane person would ever agree to pay. You wouldn't survive what happened here. The salt air carries more than just the scent of the ocean. And finally, two ruts in the sand that serve as the only connection between your new property and the rest of the world. Each one points seaward at a slightly different angle, creating overlapping fields of fire that would have made this position nearly impregnable during wartime. The problem is, according to your research, no military installation was ever built here. You're in the lamp room, checking the beacon's rotation mechanism, when the deep boom rolls across the water. The night air hits your face like a cold slap, carrying the sharp scent of gunpowder. Not the stale, chemical smell of modern explosives, but something older, black powder, the kind used in Civil War artillery. Your flashlight beam sweeps across the nearest cannon, and you stumble backward in shock. The metal barrel is warm to the touch, and wisps of smoke curl from its mouth like ghostly breath in the salt air. You freeze, every nerve suddenly alert. The sound comes again, a bass note so low you feel it in your chest rather than hear it with your ears. Every disappearance happened during the new moon, when natural light would be minimal. Every ship that vanished was traveling northbound, and in every case, the last known position puts them exactly offshore from this lighthouse. Thermal expansion from the day's heat, you tell yourself. Sound carrying strangely across the water from some distant source. The most recent entry is from 1987, a fishing boat called the Sarah Marie that left port with 3 men aboard. I found references in old naval records to something called the Beacon Point incident, still wearing his uniform, still giving orders to men who died 150 years ago. Some signals should never be answered. He looked up at the lighthouse and saluted. I think he's waiting for something. I think they're all waiting. Your great-uncle's belongings include several boxes of papers stored in the lighthouse basement, documents you haven't had time to examine properly. Working by lamplight, the basement's electrical system died decades ago. You discover that Marcus Thorne was a meticulous record keeper. His journal spanned 40 years, beginning with his first day as lighthouse keeper and continuing until just weeks before his death. Always capitalized, always mentioned in passing, never explained. But as you read deeper into the chronology, a pattern emerges. Every few months, always during the new moon, Marcus would write variations of the same entry. Heard them again last night. Cannons fired 3 times. No ships visible offshore. Later entries become more detailed and considerably more disturbing. The powder smoke is getting thicker. Sometimes I can see figures moving around the guns, but when I go outside to investigate, there's no one there. Whatever happened here was significant enough to rate official documentation, but classified enough that the details were redacted or removed entirely, and was found 2 weeks later, empty and drifting, 30 miles out to sea. No distress signal, no signs of struggle, no explanation for why the crew would have abandoned a perfectly seaworthy vessel. The human mind playing tricks in isolation. By morning, You've almost convinced yourself that nothing supernatural occurred. Local historical society looked into it once, back in the 80s, and the way his eyes constantly dart toward the cannons that suggests his interest isn't purely academic. I've been researching this location for 15 years, he tells you, declining your offer of coffee. There's something here that doesn't add up. Ship manifests from the 1800s show vessels disappearing along this stretch of coast with remarkable frequency, not wrecked disappeared. As in, they sailed into this area and were never seen again. Funny thing though, all their research materials went missing from the town hall. Water damage, they claimed, though that section of the building stayed bone dry during the flood that supposedly ruined everything, almost. Artillery fire, but that's impossible. The cannons below are antiques, museum pieces. First comes Mrs. Holloway, a woman in her 70s who introduces herself as your nearest neighbor, though her house is still 3 miles down the coast road. She brings a casserole and a warning delivered with the practiced efficiency of someone who has had this conversation before. Don't light the beacon after midnight, she tells you, settling her considerable bulk into one of your kitchen chairs. Your uncle knew that rule. His uncle before him knew it too. Some rules exist for good reasons, even if we've forgotten what those reasons are. You've examined them carefully. There's no powder, no projectiles, no mechanism for firing even if someone wanted to attempt it. No fort, no battery, no defensive position appears in any historical record. Yet here they sit, massive and undeniably real, their carriages sunk into concrete pads that show no signs of recent construction. The lighthouse rises from a rocky outcrop, a bone finger pointing accusingly at the sky. Its white paint peeling in long strips that flutter in the constant wind. But what catches your attention immediately aren't the weathered buildings or the overgrown keeper-esque cottages, the artillery. And the cannons that guard this shore have been loaded for over a century, waiting for a signal that should never come. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And the isolation that initially unnerved you begins to feel almost peaceful. You establish a routine: morning maintenance, afternoon reading, evening preparation for lighting the beacon. The cannons become part of the landscape, no more threatening than the rocky shoreline or the twisted pine trees that grow in impossible angles, shaped by decades of coastal wind. Drop your location and the time you're listening in the comments. I always love seeing where these stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. There's only you, standing in the lamp room of Beacon Point Lighthouse, watching the Civil War cannons below point their silent mouths toward the restless Atlantic. Marcus Thorne had lived alone at Beacon Point for 37 years, operating a lighthouse that most maritime charts didn't even acknowledge existed anymore. When his lawyer called to inform you that you inherited not just the lighthouse, but the entire point of land it sat on, your first instinct was to sell. That was before you learned about the clause in the deed. The lighthouse must remain operational. The beacon must be lit every night except when conditions require otherwise, and under no circumstances should the light ever be activated between the hours of midnight and dawn. Hey guys, tonight we're heading to one of the most isolated stretches of coastline in New England, where the boundary between the living and the dead grows thinner with each incoming tide. You never wanted to be a lighthouse keeper. The job fell into your lap the same way your great-uncle's death did, sudden, unexpected, and with paperwork that needed immediate attention. The drive to Beacon Point takes you down a road that seems to narrow with each mile until the pavement gives way to gravel, then to dirt. 6 Civil War-era cannons ring the lighthouse grounds, their iron barrels dark with age and salt corrosion. Your first week passes quietly enough. The lighthouse mechanism is surprisingly well maintained. The keeper's cottage is livable despite its age. It's on your 8th night that you first hear the sound. You descend the lighthouse stairs 2 at a time, grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen before stepping outside. sleep doesn't come that night. You sit in the cottage kitchen, nursing cup after cup of coffee and trying to rationalize what you've experienced. The next few days bring visitors something that hasn't happened since your arrival. When you ask about the Cannons, her weathered face goes carefully blank. Been there longer than anyone remembers, she says. The second visitor arrives 2 days later. Dr. James Morrison introduces himself as a maritime historian from the State University. But there is something about his nervous energy. He produces a manila folder, thick with photocopied documents. Look at this pattern, he says, spreading papers across your kitchen table. You study the documents, noting dates that span nearly 2 centuries. Here's what really bothers me, Dr. Morrison continues, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. That night, you find yourself unable to resist the temptation to research further. The early entries are mundane, weather observations, maintenance notes, occasional mentions of passing ships. One entry, dated just 2 years before Marcus's death, stops you cold. They're getting bolder. Last night I saw him clearly, the artillery captain. The final entry in the journal, and there's a single line, written in handwriting that shakes with either fear or rage. I understand now why the beacon must never shine after midnight. Your nights at the fortress become increasingly surreal as the ghostly gun crews grow bolder. What started as occasional sounds and movements escalates into full phantom artillery drills that play out in intricate detail. Following a draft of cold air, you find a concealed entrance behind a false wall in the fort's magazine room. The underground rooms are arranged in a perfect circle, their walls covered with symbols that hurt to look at, directly geometric patterns that seem to shift and writhe when viewed by flashlight. Instead of iron cannonballs, this weapon is loaded with something that defies description, a projectile that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it, a sphere of absolute darkness that makes your eyes water and your mind recoil. Whatever they were supposed to target is still out there, still waiting each night. The phantom drills become more intense, more focused. The cannon isn't aimed at some distant target beyond the fort walls, it's pointed upward, toward the ceiling, toward the parade ground above. The entire fort was built as a launching platform for this single weapon, and every other cannon in the installation is positioned to create a protective perimeter around the firing point. The invisible gun crews are no longer practicing, they're preparing for immediate action. You can feel their anticipation building like pressure before a storm, and you know that whatever they're planning to shoot at is finally approaching. The projectile of living darkness tears through the fabric of reality itself, opening a wound in the world that bleeds shadows and screams. The darkness retreats, the screaming fades, and the threshold between worlds seals itself with a sound like cosmic thunder. They'll find another guard eventually, they always do. Someone else will take the night shift, walk the empty corridors. Some jobs aren't worth any amount of money, and some secrets are too dangerous for the living to keep. Let the dead maintain their eternal watch. You're going to find work somewhere. The cannons stay silent, and the shadows don't move on their own. And gradually discover what the phantom artillery crews of Fort Blackwater are really guarding against. The ghost crews have held their position once again, maintaining the vigil that protects humanity from horrors it was never meant to encounter. For one terrible moment, you glimpse what lies beyond that wonder realm, where things that were never human pace endlessly in geometries that shouldn't exist, waiting for their chance to cross over into our world. And the spectral soldiers of Fort Blackwater have been maintaining their eternal vigil in preparation for the moment when their lines finally receive the command to open fire. The ghost crews throughout the fort begin firing in sequence, their phantom cannons speaking with voices of thunder and lightning. The phantom crews continue their drills, preparing for the next time the threshold weakens and something tries to force its way through. They've been patient for 150 years, and they can wait 150 more if necessary. After all, the dead have nothing but time, and the darkness beyond the wound never stops trying to break free. But they're not firing outward toward the harbor, they're firing inward, creating a barrier of supernatural artillery that surrounds the central weapon like a cage of sound and fury. You understand instinctively that this is what Private Morrison was writing about. The ammunition that came in unmarked crates and spooked an entire garrison. The answer comes to you in fragments, pieced together from overheard phantom conversations and symbols that begin to make horrible sense. You're in the underground chamber when the voices begin again, but this time they're different, older, speaking in languages that predate human civilization. The symbols on the walls pulse with sickly light, and the bronze cannon begins to rotate slowly toward its firing position. The fort wasn't built to defend against Confederate ships or foreign invaders. It was constructed to contain something that was trying to break through from somewhere else, and the artillery crews have been standing guard at the threshold for over a century. At the center of the circle sits a single cannon, larger and more ornate than anything in the fort's official collection. Its bronze barrel is covered with the same disturbing symbols, and its carriage bears brass plates inscribed with names in a language you don't recognize. The hidden passage leads to chambers that were sealed off decades ago, spaces that exist in no official blueprint or historical record. You watch invisible soldiers load cannons with ammunition not see, following procedures that died out with the Civil War. The commands grow more urgent each night, as if the Spectral garrison is preparing for a battle that has been delayed by more than a century. The breakthrough comes when you discover the basement levels that aren't marked on any tourist map. What you find down there makes your blood freeze, but it's the ammunition that truly terrifies you. The ghost crews have been preparing for over 150 years to fire this weapon again, following orders that came from sources no military historian has ever been able to identify. Your presence at the fort has somehow accelerated their timeline. The realization hits you as you're examining the underground chamber during your 4th week on the job. But protection from what? And what could possibly require such an elaborate and secretive preparation? On your final night at Fort Blackwater, the Spectral garrison finally receives their orders. You run for the surface, taking the stairs 3 at a time, but you're not fast enough to escape what happens next. The big gun fires once, its report so loud that windows shatter in the nearby town, but the phantom garrison knows their duty. The perimeter cannons fire again and again, weaving a net of spectral artillery that forces the wound closed. When morning comes, you submit your resignation. The job posting goes up again within a week, advertising the same simple security duties at the same excellent pay rate. But that guard won't be you. You've seen enough of the darkness that seeps through the cracks in reality, heard enough of the voices that speak from empty air. The fort stands empty again tonight, waiting for its next security guard. You're safe now, but just in case... don't look behind you.